All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our brand new course and lesson number 1 of Fascinating Facts. I am so excited to be here with you. This course is a course of Jewish knowledge and Jewish literacy where you sharpen your Jewish knowledge skills of the important facts and some of the obscure facts as well of Judaism. We are going to debunk a lot of popular myths and misconceptions about Judaism while we answer at least 63 of the biggest Jewish questions you might have had or might have never known that you would have until this course. We have 6 lessons. Each lesson covers a different category. It's almost like one of my favorite game shows called, you probably remembered Alex Trebek, right, was the host? It was called, no, not that one. Jeopardy. Jeopardy. That's my joke. Jeopardy. That's where I was going. We have 6 categories, and each lesson covers a different category. So you might be asking, what are the 6 categories? The 6 categories are as follows. Biblical literacy, that's tonight. Next week, lesson 2 is Jewish life cycles. Lesson 3, mysticism and spirituality. That's the one that talks about like the angels, the ghosts, the demons, Satan, all that stuff. Lesson 4, 2, 3, 4, is about food. Can't go wrong with that. Lesson 5, Hebrew language. And lesson number 6, ethics and identity. So there is a ton of topics to get to. Each class will cover at least 10 questions and areas of inquiry. We begin, as always, with a bad joke. So the joke goes like this. There was a fellow, his name was Moshe Weiss. Moshe Weiss, with a W, but pronounced Weiss, from Poland. And he is in the United States, and it's time for him to become a United States citizen. The problem is, he doesn't speak a word of English. But his friends tell him, you have nothing to worry about, because you have an appointment with Judge Stein. Judge Stein is a Jewish judge. He's asked the same questions for the last 40 years. Memorize the answer to these questions, and you are golden. Question number 1 is going to be, what is your name? To which you will answer, Moshe Weiss. Question number 2 is, how many children do you have? To which you will answer, 5. Question 3 will be, how many states are there in the United States? You'll answer 50. Question number 4 is going to be, who was the first president of the United States? To which you will answer, George Washington. Question number 5, the very last question will be, are your parents alive, still alive? And you will answer, thank God, both. That's it. Moshe Weiss, 5, 50, George Washington, thank God, both. Well, he gets to the interview. He sits down. Judge Stein is there. And he begins asking the questions. And he says, tell me, who was the first president of the United States? He says, Moshe Weiss. He says, okay. He says, how many states are there? He says, 5. How many children do you have? He says, 50. Oh my God. He says, all right, hold on a second. Tell me, who was the first, what is your name? He says, George Washington. And at this point, the judge realized, what's going on. And he says, all right, so who's Meshuggah? Who's crazy? You or me? He says, thank God, both. So, listen, this course, just to be very clear here. Did he get his citizenship? He got citizenship, yeah. He got a chuckle and the citizenship. I mean, we can make any ending we want for this fictitious joke. Yes. They rode off into the sunset and they became fast friends. But anyway, this course is not about memorizing information. It's not like meant for all those those super intensive Jewish trivia nights, which I'm sure you're yearning to get to at the end of this 6-week course. But it's really about deepening your Jewish knowledge and deepening, just awareness about all of these important topics. So we're going to focus tonight, as I mentioned, on biblical literacy. And you'll see tonight that that's the topic. So, here we go. I'm going to begin with a question, and the question goes a little like this. The question is, how would you describe the Torah? How would you describe the Bible? What type of book is it?
A guide.
Guide, okay, good. What else? What type of book? Huh?
Reference book.
Reference book, good.
History.
History, good, very good. What else? What else? What is the Bible? What is the Torah? What is in it? What do we got? How would you characterize it? Laws?
Law.
Yeah. Absolutely. Do this. Don't do that. There's a lot of that. Good. I want to share this. I think a lot of people read the Bible or study Torah, and certainly when we're younger or whatever, and it seems like pretty much, but if you're wondering about flashing of the, there's some sort of light bulb that is flickering. So anyway, but a lot of people look at Torah and they think history, stories and history. First thing I want to mention as we get this course started is that if the Torah is a history book, with all due respect, it's a lousy history book. Why do I say that? Okay, open up your booklets, and everyone online should have been emailed a copy as well. So open up your booklets to page number 2. And I want to draw your attention to figure 1.1, which is a chart that lays out the various chapters of the Torah and the time span that these chapters cover. And so let me draw your attention to the following point. There are a total of 187 chapters in the, if you don't mind, thank you. Thank you, Dina. There are 187 chapters in the Torah. The first 52 chapters of the Torah cover a time period of about 2,500 years. So again, if you take a look at the chart, let's just go through this. The first 11 chapters of the Torah cover over 2,000 years of, hey, good to see you. Welcome back. Mazel tov. Right? You had no Mazel tov?
Yes, Mazel tov.
You had a Mazel tov. Yeah, absolutely, yeah. All right, so the first, I know it's not super fresh, but welcome. So the first 11 chapters cover a little over 2,000 years of history. Then the next 41 chapters cover a little over 400 years of history. And so if we add those two numbers together, the first 52 chapters of Torah, which starts from Genesis 1 and goes all the way to the second chapter of the book of Exodus. So those 52 chapters of the Torah, of the Bible, cover close to 2,500 years of history. And then the remaining 135 chapters of the Torah cover a time period of about 3 years. 2 years around the Exodus, and then fast forward 38 years later, the last year of the Jewish wandering in the desert before they finally enter the Promised Land. And if we were to put this in U.S. kind of history terms, like in the context of a book on U.S. history, we might say the following. Imagine there was a history book on the United States that had 187 chapters. Okay? With 135 of those chapters covering a span of about 4 months. That would be very, Very uneven. Very uneven. If Torah is a history book, it doesn't really comprehensively cover history. Now, the simple explanation is, well, it's not necessarily a history book. It's about the history of the origins of the Jewish people. That's why it kind of fast forwards through, the general human history stories, and then slows down as soon as we get to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and then especially when we get to the Exodus and Moses and kind of like the origins of our people. That's where it really slows down and grinds into the details, and that might be true. But then that raises another question about the idea of Torah, and I'll share with you that in a moment. Hey, good to see you. Welcome. And the next question is, even if that is the concept of Torah's history, in other words, that it's kind of focusing, the main focus is on, the origin story of the Jewish people specifically, which kind of makes sense as the Jewish Bible. There are a lot of stories that seem to have a lot of extra details that we don't really need, and a lot of stories that we wish had more detail that's omitted. It still seems to be a very uneven history book. I'll give you an example. You familiar with the story of Jacob? Jacob has to run away from home when his twin brother Esau wants to kill him. And he goes to spend some time by his uncle. And he becomes a shepherd by his uncle whose name is Laban. And as he's a shepherd by his uncle, they make a deal about the sheep. And I see eyeballs glossing over already. And that's kind of as you read it, like they made a deal, the speckled and the spotted and the ringed sheep should belong to Jacob, and the ones that don't should belong to Laban. And you're thinking like, is this relevant? Do we really need to know this? And yet when it comes to Abraham, for example, we don't have any mention of the first 75 years of his life. Very bizarre. It's very bizarre. It seems like a lot of things that we would think we should have, details that we should have, we don't have, and a lot of details that we don't think we should have, we end up having. It seems to be a bit uneven. Let's take a look, therefore, at a guiding principle of what Torah is and what it is for. Toba, please get us kicked off formally with text 1a. This is on page 3 of the booklets. Again, page 3, text 1a. I should point out, this text comes from the great Maharal of Prague, the great Rabbi Yehuda Loewy, who was the rabbi in the 16th century in Prague, creator of the Golem and other wonderful feats as well. Toba, please take it away.
The Torah guides people along the path they must take in order to reach their greatest potential. It is therefore appropriately called Torah, which implies guidance.
There you go. The Maharal says, what is Torah? It's not a book of history. It's not a book of even, the history of the Jewish people per se. It's rather primarily a book of instruction. What is the Hebrew word for teacher? Morah or moreh. And think about it. Listen to the words. Morah or moreh, Torah. Torah comes from the same etymological, the same grammatical root as the word morah or moreh, which means teacher. The Torah is a book of instruction, a book of lessons. It's a life guide. Think of it as the blueprint of creation. Think of it as the blueprint or the instruction manual for life. How many times have people said, "Oh, I wish life came with an instruction manual"? To which I always say, wait a second, as I come back with my Torah and show you, we got one. In other words, I wish, we had some guidance in this life. We do. It's called the Torah, which means, and this is very important as we kind of lead into today's lesson, all of the stories that are found in Torah are instructional. The things that are not instructional are not there. And that's why, and furthermore, the things that are omitted that you think maybe should be there, the fact that they're omitted, the omission itself is sometimes an instruction. Does that make sense? In other words, you can learn by what's there, you can learn from what's there, and you can learn also from what is not there. So I want to circle back to hold on, before I circle back, one more text. Toba, I'll ask you to read, please, one more text. Text 1b on the next page from the Zohar, the primary work of Jewish mysticism. Take it away, please.
Woe to the person who says that the Torah's objective is merely to relate stories and simplistic tales. If the objective of the Torah were to relate historical matters, the rulers of the world have historical chronicles that are superior. Let us utilize them and produce from them a better Torah.
You see what the Zohar is saying? If the Torah is meant to be a history book, it's doing a lousy job. In fact, the nations of the world have better history books. Those should be the Torah. But, of course, that's not what Torah is. Torah is not, who lived before whom? I need to know. That's not Torah's agenda. It's not about, who lived when and what did they end with their life and times. It's not about the history. It's about understanding lessons about how to live our lives. It's a living, breathing guide for human life. That's what Torah is. The word history, there's actually no original Hebrew word for history. This is not the lesson on Hebrew language. That's coming up in a few weeks. But in modern Hebrew, you know what the Hebrew word for history is? Historia. You know what that sounds like? That sounds like history. That's like a fake news word. I mean, it's not fake, but it's like, what's the Hebrew word for radio? Radio. Okay. And television? Televisia. Okay, which means that there's no Hebrew word for these words, right? It's all like an adapted English word. There is no Hebrew word for history. You know why? History implies something of the past. In fact, if you want to do a play on words, I don't know if this is what it's actually. History is his story. It's not my story. It's someone else's story. Yenim's Maisa, as we might say in Yiddish. That person's story. Not my story. That's history. In Judaism, Torah is not history. It's not someone else's story. It's our story. So everything that it contains is a life lesson. And if it doesn't contain it, either there's no lesson or we can learn something precisely from its omission. And now we circle back, because I dropped a breadcrumb before, or maybe an Easter egg, depending on, to mix metaphors. But I dropped a point before. I said that, Abraham, we don't know anything about, in the written Torah, in the Bible, there's no mention of what Abraham did for the first 75 years of his life. At 75, the first thing we know about him is that God tells Abraham, Lech Lecha, which means, go west, Fievel. I paraphrase, right? Go forth, my son. That's the first thing we know that God tells Abraham. Who's this Abraham guy? Why is God speaking to him? Out of all the people on earth, why is God speaking to Abraham and telling him to go to the land that I will show you? I will make you great, a great nation. Through you, everyone will be blessed. Those who bless you will be blessed. Those who curse you will be cursed. Who's this guy? Who's this guy, Abraham? It takes the Midrash, it takes the oral tradition, the oral Torah to tell us, Abraham. Oh, you don't know who Abraham? By the age of 75, he had on his own discovered monotheism, stood up to kings and rulers, stood up to his own family, right? Given up his life, sacrificed, been ready to sacrifice his life for his beliefs in the one God, spread the message of monotheism. He had a big resume, but we don't read about any of that. The question is why? None of that is written in the actual 5 books of Moses, not in the Torah scroll. We know it because it's our family story, and we've recorded it because, we know the stories. But why is it not written? So I'll share with you an insight. Again, everything in Torah is an instruction, even what's not there. The reason why it's not there is to remind us that when it comes to our relationship with God, what really cements our relationship is not the stuff, is not how we discover God, but it's how we respond to God's requests from us. For the first 75 years of his life, Abraham was striving to discover God, but God had never reached out. No human being on their own can conjure up a true and pure image of who and what God is and how God wishes to be served and worshipped. No human being can conjure up, and if we do, we might be creating a God in our own image or in the image of our mind or imagination. It's at 75 when God finally reaches out and says, hey, Abraham, Lech Lecha, right? I want you to go. I'm giving you a mitzvah. That's when the relationship really begins. And that's how the Torah reminds us that when we come up with our imagination of what God might want or what we think God wants, we might be right. We might also not be right. The best way to know what God wants is to hear what God says and to respond, right? God has no problem telling us what he wants us to do, and that is how the relationship is defined. Make sense? Yes? Questions, comments? No? Okay. Let's move on to the next idea. Let's talk about something else that's omitted in the Torah. One thing that's omitted in the Torah, another thing that's omitted in the Torah is the identity of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. What was the tree? What was its fruit? What type of fruit was this tree? Take a look at text number 2. Eve, please read text 2, where the Torah tells us the story, or at least an excerpt of the Torah story, about the tree of knowledge of good and evil.
And the Lord God caused to sprout from the ground every tree that was pleasant to see and good to eat, and in the midst of the garden the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And the Lord commanded man, saying, of every tree of the garden you may freely eat, but of the tree of knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for you shall surely die on the day that you eat thereof.
All right, thank you. Now, again, one thing that's missing is the identity of the tree. Well, what kind of tree was it? So if I ask you the question, what was the tree of knowledge? What was the fruit? What's the typical answer?
Apple.
An apple. Everyone knows. Everyone thinks they know at least that what was the tree of knowledge? An apple tree. Where is this depicted? Art. I mean, art that we probably couldn't show in a synagogue, because all them Adam and Eve have are basically, all that there is them and an apple, right? And maybe a snake, right? But what's there? An apple. It's always an apple. And what's that thing called in the Adam's apple? There's an apple juice company that's called Apple and Eve. Hello, apples are everywhere in the story, and yet, according to Jewish tradition, it's simply not true. It was not an apple. Now, what was it? We're not really sure. There's a dispute in the Talmud as to what it is. Take a look at text 3a. David, please read text 3a, where the Talmud has a debate amongst the rabbis as to the identity of the tree of knowledge.
The tree from which Adam ate, Rabbi Meir says it was a grapevine. Rabbi Nehemiah says it was a fig tree. Rabbi Yehuda says it was a wheat stalk.
Thank you. By the way, how surprising are these options? A grapevine? Okay. I heard it through the grapevine, says Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Nehemiah says fig tree. Okay. Yehuda, a wheat stalk? What were they doing with a wheat stalk? What, nibbling on a wheat stalk, on a Friday early afternoon? What was going on over there? Whatever. These are three of the opinions. There are other opinions and other sources. Well, there's another opinion that says that maybe it was an esrog, like the citron, the overpriced lemon that we use on Sukkot. Anyway, so these are the options, but it's unclear as to what it is, which begs the question. Well, hold on. Let me clarify something before we continue. Where did the misconception or the myth come from that the fruit of the tree of knowledge, or the tree of knowledge, was an apple tree? Where did that come from? I'll tell you. In Latin, it all comes from the Latin translation. In Latin, the Latin word for evil is malus, M-A-L-U-S. Sounds like M-A-L-I-C-E, malice, right? But that's the English derivation from the Latin. The Latin word for evil is M-A-L-U-S, malus, which also happens to be the same word in Latin for an apple tree. It seems like, since the word for evil also means apple tree, it seems like at some point someone just assumed that, well, maybe the tree of knowledge of good and evil was the apple tree. That's what it seems like. But it's not an apple tree. Despite all of the paintings and Michelangelo's, all of the work that he did in depicting it, it's not an apple. It's some of these things. But really the question that I want to ask right now is, there's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of uncertainty. Why doesn't the Torah just share with us the identity of the tree? So let's read the Midrash. Text 3b. David, one more, please.
Rabbi Azariah and Rabbi Yehuda ben Shimon said in the name of Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, heaven forbid, God never revealed the identity of the tree to any man, and he never will.
This is what the rabbis kind of respond to the attempt to try to figure out or determine which tree it was. This rabbi says this rabbi says that. And these rabbis say, you know what? And the Hebrew is chas v'shalom. You see that on the top line? Chas v'shalom. You might have heard that phrase. God forbid. Heaven forbid. God never revealed the identity of the tree, and he never will. Why do you think he goes like so idealistic? God forbid that heaven forbid that God will never reveal the tree. Why? What's so wrong with revealing the identity of the tree? What do you think? What would happen if we knew what the tree was? What would happen the next time you ate from the fruit of that tree? What would you be thinking about? Adam and Eve. And how they messed up. You couldn't have waited, as we're munching on the non-apple, whatever fruit that would be, as we're munching on it, we're like, you couldn't have waited a few hours. Famously, they only had a few hours. That was only prohibited until Shabbat. A few hours later, it would have been fine. They couldn't wait.
You say it would be fine, but where does it say that in the Torah?
It's not. It's in the Midrash. The Midrash tells us that basically the prohibition was only until Shabbat would arrive. And Adam and Eve were created Friday. They're not even the first thing. First were created the animals, and then Adam and Eve. They had a few hours to wait. Shabbat, it doesn't say that clearly, but that's the tradition that we have. And yet they couldn't hold back. But the point is, if we would know the identity of the tree, then every time we ate that fruit, which wouldn't be prohibited to us, but every time we ate that fruit, we would be thinking about Adam and Eve and how they messed up and essentially disparaging them in our mind. And to protect them from our disparagement, God says, you know what? I'm not going to reveal the identity of the tree. We're going to keep it unknown for all time. Yeah.
So how do we know it's not an apple?
Because it's not one of the options that the rabbis speculate. No, that's the best answer I can give. So I thought you were going to ask another question. So if God doesn't want to reveal the identity of the tree, so why are the rabbis postulating, I think it's this, I think it's that? Maybe no one should be talking about it. I don't know. I guess rabbis can't hold themselves back from speculating. But not one of the options is an apple. I guess we have it reminds me of Coca-Cola, how Coca-Cola got the kosher certification. They went to Rabbi Tovia Geffen, local rabbi. And they said, hey, we want to make Coca-Cola kosher. He says, okay, I need to certify the ingredients. They said, you can't. We have a secret ingredient. He says, well, then I can't certify it. Seems like a bit of a stalemate here. So what they do? You guys know the story? So he said, some of you know. So basically, they figured out that Coca-Cola, I don't know the numbers, but let's say there's 20 ingredients in Coca-Cola. They gave him 50 ingredients to certify. They gave him more. They gave him false stuff, whatever, more than what's actually in the formula. And so he certified all of them, amongst which is a secret ingredients, which no ingredients were secret, but certainly the formula, I guess, of what's in there and how it's blended is proprietary information. But bottom line, that's how they certified it. So I kind of think maybe that's what the rabbis did. They give a bunch of options. It might be one of these. Maybe it's an apple. I'm kidding, right? But it might be one of these. But at least we don't have certainty what was the forbidden fruit. And I also think, even though it's, this is my take on it as well, so take it for what it's worth, which is, just a thought that I'm having, which is maybe it's also a way of protecting the fruit, not only Adam and Eve. But imagine if we knew what the forbidden fruit was. Somebody might say, I don't want to eat it. It gives me the heebie-jeebies. The forbidden fruit, that's what messed up everything for all time. That's what brought death, invited death to humanity and got us kicked out of the Garden of Eden, out of paradise. I don't want it, even if it's on sale. Right? And for a Jew, that's a big thing to say. I'm kidding, right? I don't want it. I don't want it. So to protect the fruit from being disparaged, to protect Adam and Eve from being disparaged, God says, you know what? We're not going to talk about it. We're not going to identify it. Again, another lesson from omission. One tree that we do know the identity of is the place from where God first speaks to Moses. Where does God speak to Moses from?
The burning bush.
Burning bush. What kind of bush was it?
A snag.
A snag. What's a snag good? What is it? A thorn bush. Good, thorn bush. Reminds me of a story, a joke that was told back when, probably when the first President Bush was president, where he lands in Ben Gurion Airport, and he sees an old man with a long beard, white robes, and a walking stick carrying a sheep. He's like, Moses? And the guy doesn't turn around. President Bush said, Moses? Doesn't turn around. He goes right next to him and says, Moses, why didn't you answer me? He says, the last time I spoke to a bush, I got roped into a job I didn't want. I was stuck for the next 40 years running after things. No more. That's the joke. Anyway, so I didn't promise good jokes. I just said a joke. But we know the identity of the bush. What was it? It was a thorn bush. Take a look at how the Torah describes it. Text 4a. Elizabeth, please.
Oh my God. I do have an accent, guys.
It's all right. It's okay.
An angel of God appears to Moses in a heart of a fire in the midst of thorn bush. He looked, and behold, the thorn bush was ablaze, but the thorn bush was not consumed.
So thank you. So here we have, this is the direct quote from the book of Exodus, chapter 3, verse 2, where God appears for the first time to Moses in a fire in the midst of a thorn bush. And we know that it was on fire, but it wasn't being consumed. But why is it a thorn bush? Why is it specified? Why can't it just say that the voice of God rang out to Moses and said, go to Pharaoh and tell him, let my people go? We have to know that it came from a thorn bush? Who cares? How is it relevant? Right? That's what everything in Torah is relevant. And so it becomes relevant to ask the question, why is it relevant? How is it relevant? And what's the answer? Take a look, one more, text 4b, please. Elizabeth, one more. This is Rashi's explanation, a beautiful explanation.
From within the thorn bush, and not any other type of tree, because I am with Israel in their distress.
Thank you. Rashi says, why the thorn bush? And why do we need to know that it was a thorn bush? Right, that it was a thorn bush, that's what happened. But why does the Torah need to tell us that it was a thorn bush? Because there's a meta message. There's a message within the message. The general message is Exodus is happening. Moses, you be the representative, you be the leader. But the meta message is, if you or the Jewish people think that I have forgotten about them in their suffering, you need to know that I am also in the thorn bush. The thorn bush being evocative of pain. Yeah, anybody ever grab a rose and forget that it's happened to me, right? You get cut, you get pricked in the finger. The fact that God is in the thorn bush means Hashem is saying, God Almighty is saying, I am with you, imay anochi b'tzara. I am with you in your tzara, in your tzaras, and all the pain and all the suffering. Look, there's that, I don't know where it's from, there's this parable or anecdote of a guy who passes away, and in the afterlife they show him a video of his life. And he sees, this recording of his life. He sees himself, and he sees that everywhere he goes in life, there's two sets of footprints, his and God's. But in the most difficult times, there's only one set of footprints. And he says to God, God, where were you? In my most difficult times, where were you? Only one set of footprints. God says, that set of footprints is mine. I was carrying you. So along these lines, we sometimes think where was God? Where was God in this tragedy? Where was God in that tragedy? And one thing that Rashi is telling us is that God, by appearing to Moses in the thorn bush, is effectively and essentially telling us, when you're in distress, I am with you. Now, that may raise more questions than it does answers. Well, if God is there with us, then why doesn't he just make it not happen, or undo it, or make it feel better? So that, we don't know. But the idea that God is with us, God swooped in and rescued us on a very national level. I mean, there are many times that miracles happen, but on a level like that, the Exodus was certainly one example where God took us out. But after that, it's kind of like God's going to partner with us, but we're going to have to do a lot of heavy lifting, and it doesn't always end, so quickly in such glory. The point is that God is saying, when times are most difficult, I'm not outside of that experience. I am with you, and that's the significance of the thorn bush. So the tree of knowledge, we don't know what it is, right? Why? Because we don't want to point any fingers. When it comes to the place from which God gives Moses his mission, that we do know that is a thorn bush. Make sense? Yes? Questions? Comments? No? Nothing yet? Okay. So that is a tale of two trees. Now let's continue by looking at some quick facts. Take a look at the box on page 8. I'm going to read this. Many common English phrases originate in the Bible. For example, the source of the idiom, the writings on the wall, which refers to an omen of unpleasant fate, is in the book of Daniel. And here's the story. King Belshazzar made a great feast and asked that the vessels that his grandfather Nebuchadnezzar had taken from the holy temple be brought to the feast. When the king's wishes were fulfilled, the figure of a human hand emerged and wrote 4 Aramaic words on the wall of the palace. Minei, Minei, Tekel, Ufarsin. By the way, if you were at a dinner party and handwriting starts appearing on the wall, you might want to check out for the night, say this was a great party, I got to go home, the babysitter called, whatever, the dog needs to get walked. All right. The king was terrified, back inside. The king was terrified. Daniel was summoned Daniel was a Jewish prophet who was also connected with the king. Daniel was summoned to interpret their meaning, and in doing so, he prophesied the destruction of the kingdom. So what do the words mean? Here's the breakdown. Minei means to count. God has counted and recounted, right? Double expression, minei. God has counted and recounted the days of your kingdom and has brought it to an end. Tekel, to weigh. You were weighed on the scales and found wanting. Ufarsin means to divide. Your kingdom has been broken up and given to Media and Persia. Paras Umadai. That very night Belshazzar was assassinated and Media and Persia conquered the Babylonian Empire. And thus was born the phrase, the handwriting is on the wall, as a negative portend, a negative omen of something to happen. But that's the story of the writing on the wall. Okay, now let's continue with some more myths and misconceptions. And the next one we're going to cover is one that pertains to matzah. But first, a pop quiz. What do plastic, penicillin, pacemakers, and potato chips have in common? Good. Good. All right, plastic, penicillin, pacemakers, and potato chips.
The letter P.
The letter P, correct. This is I should have told you before. This is an episode of Sesame Street sponsored by the letter P and the number 13. I'm kidding. Okay. No, but what else? What else is common about these items? These are all innovations that happened by accident. They were all accidental discoveries. Now, I know. Accidents happen, whatever the line is, when you're, very prepared or whatever it is. Fine. But these were all accidental discoveries. Along with, by the way, Coca-Cola. Speaking of which, trying to connect dots here. They're all accidental inventions. And if I were to ask you, why do we eat matzah on Passover? What would you say? Where does it come from? Why do we eat matzah on Passover? Because the Torah says yes. But what's the story? What's the original story of matzah? It seems like it was also an accident, right? They were leaving Egypt, and they didn't have time to bake bread. And so they put the dough, all right, you heard this as a kid, I heard this as a kid. They put dough on their backs or whatever it was. Maybe not backs, a little gross, whatever. And it baked. And it baked. They were running and it just baked and it didn't rise. And that's it. You heard that story? Yeah. But is it true? That's the question we're going to address right now. So the first thing we'll do is read text 5a. Danielle, please read text. First of all, how cool is it that you're here? So amazing to have you here. Now, if you don't mind, please read text 5a. And this is going to be the first text that we're going to open up our matzah conversation with.
They baked the dough that they had brought out of Egypt into matzah rounds, for it had not leavened because they were driven out of Egypt and could not delay.
Thank you. Now, that implies that matzah was an accidental creation. In other words, they would have baked it as bread. However, they were running and it didn't have a chance to rise. They had to, quickly bake bread, and it ended up as matzah. However, let's take a look at text 5b. Now, let me explain where text 5b falls in the order of verses. Text 5b is about 31 verses prior to the verse that we just read about them running out of Egypt and not having time for the dough to rise. 31 verses earlier, God delivers an instruction to Moses to tell the Jewish people about what to do on the night before the Exodus. Danielle, please read text 5b as well.
During this night they shall eat the meat of the paschal lamb. It shall be roasted over fire and eaten with matzah and bitter herbs.
1 second. Now let me break this down. 2 weeks before the Exodus, God tells Moses about what's going to happen. It's going to come the night of the 15th, right? On the day of the 14th of the month of Nisan, you're going to offer the paschal lamb, slaughter it, whatever. And that night, you're going to have what we might call the Last Supper in Egypt, right? Not that Last Supper, but the Last Supper in slavery in Egypt. And then the next day was the Exodus. The Exodus, the Jews left not in the middle of the night. That's when the 10th plague happened in the middle of the night. But they actually left Egypt high noon of the next day. Just so that history would never say that the Jews escaped, under the guise of darkness or under they slipped out in the middle of the night. They left in the middle of the day. So let's say they left midday, at noon, at high noon. Fine. But they were instructed the night before to bake matzah and eat it with their paschal lamb and their bitter herbs, basically a spicy lamb sandwich, right? You got your carbs, you got your meat, you got your vegetable. That was the night before. So then why does the Torah say 31 verses later that how did matzah come about? Oh, because they were running and didn't have a chance to rise. Didn't have a chance to rise. They were told, matzah is not an accident. It was intentional by divine decree to bake matzah. What's going on here? The Avudraham, which is one of the commentaries and Jewish thinkers of the 14th century, the Avudraham, gives an explanation to try to reconcile these two. Text 5c. One more, please.
The Jews were commanded to eat matzah before the Exodus because of what would transpire afterwards. Hashem, who knows the future, knew that the Jews would need to leave Egypt in a hurry and would not have time to bake leavened bread, even if they wished to do so. He therefore commanded them to eat the paschal lamb together with matzah.
Comes along the Avudraham and says both verses are true. God commanded them well in advance to bake matzah. Why? Because he knew that the next day they would be running out of Egypt, gathering all their stuff, and who's going to have time to bake bread and to let it rise? There's no time. My wife, over the last, how long has it been? Maybe about a year, has been baking sourdough. Anybody bake sourdough? My gosh, it takes days. And sometimes if you start the timing, at a certain point in time, she's waking up every 30 minutes in the middle of the night to stretch and fold, or you got to feed the starter. I don't know. It's like a baby in the house. It's like another, right? It's like you're raising a child. You got to, make sure that it's healthy, that it's, doing its thing. I don't even know the right terms. What's the point? The point is, baking bread. I'm sure they didn't have the little packets with the rapid rise yeast from whatever company it is in those multicolored 3-pack things that you buy at the Fleischmann's. Sounds like a Jewish company, right? Fleischmann's. All the way back in Egypt, they didn't have Fleischmann's back in Egypt, right? So if you wanted your bread to rise, it probably took multiple hours, of kind of natural fermentation or whatever for it to rise. If that's the case, right? So God, in his knowledge of the future, says, do me a favor. The night before, or in advance of this, bake matzahs, you'll have what to eat, and you'll be happy. And so that's what we did. I'm going to get back to a deeper explanation of this, but that's the way the Avudraham kind of reconciles the two ideas. So yes, we were instructed in advance of the Exodus to bake matzah, and yes, there was no time for the dough to rise, but the good news is we already had the matzah in the boxes ready to go. By the way, speaking of matzah in boxes ready to go, shelf stable, take a look at the little box there on page 11, where it says Man O Manischewitz. I'm going to read this. Founded in 1888 by Lithuanian immigrants to America, the Manischewitz company was the first to mass-produce machine-made matzah. Let me pause here for a moment and share with you some information that I think some of you know, but some of you may not know. The man who is known as Manischewitz, Dov Manischewitz, that was not his real name. Manischewitz was a name that he got off a dead man's passport to leave Lithuania. He bought a passport of a man who had passed away with the name Manischewitz. He had a completely different name that I'm forgetting now. He was not Manischewitz, but he became Manischewitz. His wife became Mrs. Manischewitz, and they moved to Cincinnati, Ohio. They moved to Cincinnati, and he was a rabbi, he was a shochet, he did a bunch of different things. He also ran the matzah bakery, and then he realized Cincinnati was one of the gateways to the West. Maybe not like St. Louis, which was the gateway to the West, but it was one of the gateways to the West. People were exploring. The 1800s, late 1800s, right? People were exploring, early 1900s, the western part of the country. And, if you're traveling, you need food. And bread is certainly a staple that fills you up. But the problem is if you travel with a loaf of bread, how long is that going to last before it goes bad? It's not like they were driving with an outlet, electric truck that has an outlet and a freezer in the back. That's not how they were rolling. They were rolling with, whatever they had in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Covered wagons. Covered wagons. Who knows, huh? Yeah. So there you go. So he decided he got the to create. He got he had the foresight to create mass-produced mishimei matzah. Take a look at this stat. By the 1920s, it's about 100 years ago, Manischewitz produced 1.25 million matzot per day. Can you imagine that amount? First of all, who knew that machines ran that fast 100 years ago? 1.25 million matzahs per day. They were not per year, per day they were manufacturing. It's unbelievable. Their advertising slogan, "Man, oh Manischewitz," became so well known that Apollo 17 astronaut Eugene Cernan actually exclaimed that phrase during a moonwalk in 1973. Man, oh Manischewitz. I mean, what a moon. Man, oh Manischewitz. He tried to eat it subsequently, and they said, whoa, take it easy. Bro, I'm kidding. That is not part of it. Although it's kind of bumpy. I mean, the surface of the moon, like matzah, might be.
So basically, Manischewitz made his fortune selling matzahs to God.
That's what it was. Yeah, well, Jews weren't buying it 1.25 million. Are you kidding me? Yeah, listen. You know what? We've been to too many seders to buy matzah with that type of gusto, right? Fool me once, baby. Not, listen. I know I usually talk about the handmade matzah like this, but the mishimei matzah, kind of similar. Like, am I eating the matzah or am I eating the box? Like, I mean, is it like it's not? Also, it's like you eat a box of matzah, like, is it stale? Then you realize, no, that's just the taste. It just kind of starts off a drop. I'm not anti-matzah, by the way. This is not an anti-Manischewitz or an anti-Yehuda matzah. Whatever your favorite matzah is, I'm all for it. I'm just saying that is the status of matzah. There's a deeper explanation to why there's the matzah that we were instructed to make and why there's the accidental matzah because we were running, the Avraham reconciled it. But, the mystics share another thing. Matzah represents humility as opposed to bread, which is all puffed up and kind of bloated. Matzah, which is flat, so it's kind of ego versus being humble. Everyone has an ego, a healthy ego, but the goal of life, one of the goals in life is to recognize the value in suppressing our ego and being more of a mensch. Right?
The bread of affliction.
Bread of affliction. Good, right. And it's like, you're right, exactly. Yeah. You know what's shocking, Jay? It's like, how come that wasn't their tagline? Come and buy our bread of affliction. I'm assuming they wouldn't have sold 1.25 million. They wouldn't have moved so many pounds of matzah each day if it was called the original bread of affliction. I can't imagine. I can't. And after you've tried our matzah, why don't you lie down in a bed of nails? It's apparently, all the torture chambers are loving it. Anyway, back to the story. So matzah represents humility. Right, as opposed to bread, which is ego. There's two ways to become humble. One is to work on yourself, right? To work on becoming more of a mensch, to become more of a person who listens, right? Someone who shares more, someone who creates space for others, someone who has less of a need to impose their beliefs on someone else, but who is open to receiving the beliefs of others. And that's a lot of work. That may take a lifetime to move the needle a little bit incrementally to become more of a humble person. That's the matzah that we make. And then there's the matzah that happens to us. Whether it's the birth of a child and we're humbled with the blessings of God, or maybe the loss of a loved one. And suddenly we take ourselves, we realize the fragility of life. Or maybe it's, standing at the edge of the Grand Canyon and looking down into that, amazing, the wonders of God's earth. Or maybe it's witnessing the Exodus, as the Jews did then. But there are certain experiences in life that humble you from without and from within. But it's not self-generated, it's God-generated humility. And those are the two matzahs. There's the matzah that we intentionally make, right? And then there's the matzah that it just didn't have a chance to rise because we were beholding God's miracles of the Exodus. Make sense on a deeper level? All right, that's a little bit of mysticism. Matzah, mystical symbolism. All right, take a look at text 12. Speaking about debunking myths and misconceptions, this is a very interesting one. Some of you may know this, But when I taught the class today, I had a shocked reaction. It was like a perfect reaction of a collective reaction. Text 12, top of the page, the little box. Why did the Jews cross the sea? To get to the other side? That's like chicken in the road, yeah. Not according to commonly accepted Jewish tradition. Based on textual analysis, the sages deduced that the Jews entered the sea, made a semicircle, and came out on the same side as the one they had entered. What would be the purpose of coming out on the same side? The objective was not a navigational shortcut, but to annihilate the Egyptian army, so that the Jews would no longer live in dread of their erstwhile taskmasters. So let me explain. When you look at the biblical text, at the Torah's description of what happened with the splitting of the sea, and it tells us the cities that they were traveling through, and the cities that, to the sea, and then the cities that they traveled after the splitting of the sea, you realize it's on the same side of the sea. So let's say my hand is the sea. They went in and came out the same side. They made like a horseshoe, semicircle, like that. They didn't cross the sea. If you ever heard someone say, "Oh, the Jews crossed the sea," they walked into the sea, they walked out of the sea. The Egyptians followed them and were drowned in the sea. The Egyptian army that was chasing them was drowned in the sea, but they didn't actually cross the sea to the other side. All right. The more you know. The little star thing. The more you know. Okay, good. Next, myth and misconception that we'll talk about. Biblical literacy course right here. What did the tablets look like? So if I were to ask you to draw the tablets, what would you say? What would you do? You would probably take a pen and you would draw. What would the top of the tablets look like typically? Rounded. Everyone knows the rounded tablets. That's what tablets look like. What did God tell Moses? Take 2 tablets and call me in the morning. All right. I probably should have said, when Moses had a headache, what did God say? Take 2 tablets and call me in the morning. All right, fine. So the tablets, everyone knows it's always depicted as rounded. However, when you look at Jewish sources, in the Talmud, in the Midrash, in the commentaries, it becomes soon very clear that the tablets were not rounded at the top, but were rather squared off. Take a look at text 7a. Elise, please read 7a from the Talmud.
Each of the tablets was 6 handbreadths long, 6 handbreadths wide, and 3 handbreadths deep.
Thank you. And one more, Rabbeinu Bachaya ben Asher, 7b.
The tablets were square, 6 handbreadths long, and 6 handbreadths wide. If you study the dimensions of the tablets, the height, the width, and the depth, you will find that each tablet contained 108 cubic handbreadths. Thank
you. So just to hearken back to our math of right? If you want to figure out the volume of a cubed or that type of object, you just do the dimensions times 1 times the height times the width times the depth, and that's how you get the volume. So 6 times 3 is 108. 108 handbreadths, cubic handbreadths. That is the volume of each of the tablets. Now, just clarify. Well, what's a handbreadth? Everyone's like handbreadth. What's that?
3 inches.
Hold on 1 second.
3 inches.
Oh, a handbreadth. Yeah. So if you take your hand and make like a fist, so it's basically the width of your hand, about 3 inches. Okay, so that's the volume of. Now, what's the significance of the number 108? So in Gematria, in Hebrew numerology, 108 is the number associated with the word chok. Chok is 108. What does the word chok mean? Law, decree, divine decree. What did the tablets contain? God's chukim, God's laws. Look at that. You can't make this stuff up. Anyway, so that's how the tablets are described. If you take a look on page 13, which is the sponsor of tonight's class, I'm kidding. Page 13, right? Figure 1.2. So you'll see there a depiction of the tablets that you probably have never seen before. You're like, what are these things? What are these little square foam pieces. Like, what do you do with them? Are they like, do you stand on them for a greater height? Like, what? Right, so, hold on one second. Right, so what are all these things? And the answer is, these are the tablets. So typically, we've all seen the tablets with the curved tops, but in Jewish tradition, they did not have curved tops. They were square, essentially square, not perfect cubes, but they were square, and that's what they look like. There's also another source in the Talmud that talks about how the tablets, side by side, fit perfectly in the Ark of the Covenant. You know the Ark, like Raiders of the Lost Ark? So what was the Ark? The Ark is a fancy word for box. The Ark was a box. It was a gold and wooden box that had a beautiful gold cover with an image of angels on it. But if you took off the cover, what was it? Essentially, it was a rectangle box. And what was in the box? The tablets. And the Talmud says that the tablets, the size of they fit perfectly in it. Well, if they had rounded tops, you wouldn't say they fit perfectly. There's extra space. Where it's rounded, there's excess space. The point is that the tablets were square. Why is it that we all believe that it's rounded? Well, where did this misconception come from? It came from non-Jewish sources that did not have Jewish tradition in the Talmud and the Midrashim, etc., to clarify that they were square. And it infiltrated Jewish thought for the following reason. In the Middle Ages, in Europe, every Jewish book that was published was censored by the church. And when they approved a Jewish book to be published, they would put their official stamp inside of it, the governmental stamp that said, basically, it's a book that can be, it's allowed. And the stamp that they used in many cases, in many countries, was a stamp of an image of the tablets, but a rounded tablets. So for centuries, Jews were studying Jewish books with a stamp, an official-looking stamp of the tablets that looked rounded. And so who's even questioning that the tablets weren't rounded? But when you look at the sources, it's clear. The tablets were square. So it turns out that Tylenol and Motrin are starting to refashion their tablets, no longer rounded, but square. It might be harder to swallow, but it's more biblically accurate, and that's what really matters. Kidding. Okay. All right. Good. Let's move on to another misconception about shape. And this is regarding the menorah. Now, has anyone been to Rome? Yeah? Has anyone seen the Arch of Titus in Rome? Yeah? And there's a depiction of the spoils of war, or the items of the temple being carried out. And one of them, prominently displayed, is the menorah. And the menorah is depicted as having rounded or curved branches. Well, what's interesting is that might be what's inscribed in the Arch of Titus. But when you look at Jewish works and commentaries, including Rashi and including the halachic writings of Rambam, Maimonides, it becomes clear that the menorah did not have rounded branches, but rather diagonal branches. In fact, if you turn to page 14 in your booklets, you will see a facsimile. Does anyone say that word? Probably not. Yeah, it is still used. Facsimile. A mimeograph. This is one of those purple things that we churned out of the machine, of the original hand drawing of Maimonides. This is Maimonides' own handwriting. And that's his handwriting on top. And that is his drawing of the temple menorah. And you know it's the temple menorah, first of all, because he depicts kind of the cups and the flowers and the bowls that were, he's drawing it in geometrical shapes, but there were designs on the branches. And you see there's only 3 branches on each side. It's the temple menorah, it's not the Chanukiah, it's the temple menorah. Because of course the Hanukkah menorah would have 4 on each side. This is the temple menorah, and it has diagonal branches. I'll read it, the menorah angle. The tablets on top of page 14. The tablets are not the only Jewish symbol that is often inaccurately represented. The common depiction of the temple menorah with semicircular branches extending from its center is also erroneous. According to Maimonides and others, like I said, Rashi and others, the menorah's branches were straight, extending outward on a diagonal from the middle branch. And now you know the rest of the story with the menorah. By the way, when it comes to a Hanukkah menorah, all sorts of angles and shapes are fine. So whether you have a diagonal Hanukkah menorah or a curved Hanukkah menorah or one of those old school ones that was just kind of like with a straight back and then just the lamps kind of without any branches at all, it's kosher as long as they're in one straight row. That's all. The 8 are in a straight row and the shamash is a little higher. That's all you need. But as far as the temple menorah, according to our tradition, according to many sources, it was on a diagonal. So how did the Arch of Titus have it wrong? All right, that's the other question. I've seen it argued as to who says that, what's depicted in the Arch of Titus was actually the temple menorah. Might have been another candelabra, or might have been who knows what it was. Maybe the Jews, with the impending destruction of the temple, that with the handwriting on the wall as it were with their holy temple, maybe they put the real menorah away in hiding and put another candelabra out there that had rounded branches. So who knows if the thing that's depicted, the Arch of Titus, if that candelabra was actually the temple menorah. It is not necessarily certain that it was. Now, yeah.
Where does Maimonides get his evidence? Because the Arch of Titus was centuries, before.
Yeah, it's a good question. So the question is, where does he get it from? Rashi on the Torah says that it comes out, the branches come out as an alachson, which means diagonal. Where do they get it from? I'm forgetting already. There's a lot of scholarship on this because there's a lot of pushback. It says, well, one second, the Arch of Titus. I mean, that's like etched in history. That seems to be pretty definitive. But there are a lot of textual sources and indications that it is. Maimonides didn't just make it up. There was stuff, but as to the exact back and forth, I don't have it, in my head fresh. But it's certainly look it up. Now, yeah. What is that? Where is that?
In Jerusalem, in the old city.
Yeah. Well, there you go. That's also rounded. So I should be clear. There are scholars that push back on this and say Maimonides got it wrong, that it was rounded. But I don't know, Rashi and Rambam and others say diagonal. I mean, those are two of the greatest. So, I don't know. It's interesting. It's definitely an interesting thing to think about. Now, what about, has anyone encountered someone at some point who wondered if you had horns? Right? Like, where are your horns? Someone said it to your mom?
Was it mommy or was it grandpa? It might have been grandpa.
Someone said it to your grandma?
Yeah, literally.
Yeah. Where are your horns?
I did. Jewish. Where are your horns?
Where are your horns? Right. I usually say I keep it under my kippah. Or I say I've got the extendable version, the retractable. It just makes it easy. It's push button. It also helps, because I don't pay for cable, but the horns really pick up. I got at least 750 out of 1,000 channels on that thing. I'm kidding. And by the way, no one has actually said it to me, but I have met over the years so many people that told me that somebody at some point asked them about horns. You're Jewish, where are your horns? Whether it's in college, they went to school and they went to college in Alabama or Mississippi, and the first time that this person ever met a Jew, or the person was from who knows? So where does this come from? It sounds actually a little bit meshuggah. It's like, you think Jews have horns? Why would Jews have horns? What does that even mean? And where would that come from? Well, you might be familiar with this origin story, which is kind of wild. Phil, you're up to reading text 8a, please. Page 15.
Sure. When Moses descended from Mount Sinai, the 2 tablets of the testimony were in his hand as he descended from the mountain. And Moses did not know that the skin of his face had become radiant, Quran, when God spoke with him. Aaron and all the children of Israel saw Moses, and behold, the skin of his face was radiant, and they were afraid to approach him.
So listen to this. This text that you just read is coming from the Torah as it describes Moses coming down the mountain with a second set of tablets. It says he came down the mountain with the tablets. The first set of tablets he broke. Whoops. The second set of tablets he comes down with, and the skin of his face was radiant. And the language, the Hebrew of that is Karan ar panav. The skin of his face became Karan, became radiant. Now, here's where it gets interesting. The Hebrew word karan here means radiant. But if you revowelize it to the word keren, same consonant, same Hebrew letters, but read it a little bit differently, not karan, but keren means horn. And in the first primary Latin translation of the Torah, of the Bible, the Latin translation has it as Moses' face became horned, which I don't even know what that means. Take a look at text 8b. Fill one more, please. Text 8b at the bottom of 15.
And when Moses came down from Mount Sinai, he held the 2 tablets of the testimony, and he knew not that his face was horned from the conversation of the Lord.
You see that? Isn't that unbelievable? In the Vulgate, which is Jerome, he was an ancient scholar, which is Jerome's Latin translation of the Bible, he has it, again, this is an English version of that Latin translation, but in the Latin, he has it not that Moses' face was radiant, but that his face was horned. I don't even know what that means. Bumpy? I don't know. But it says his face was horned. This led to artists depicting Moses as coming down the mountain with horns coming out of his head. Famously, Michelangelo, right? Not one of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Wow. But Michelangelo, like the artist and sculptor, he has a depiction of Moses as having horns coming out of his head. Now, the truth is, that also doesn't make sense. Because even if you read it as horns, it says horns from his face, not from his head. So even according to that, you got it wrong. But either way, they misread the word. The translation was mistranslated. It's not Karen. It's not that his face had horns. His face became radiant. I don't know if you know this, but because of this, the Torah says, because Moses' face was so radiant, he wore a mask. Yeah, he wore a mask. Yeah. You know, like the one in the hockey mask in that movie, what was it called? No, not that one. The other one. Friday, whatever. Not that mask. Another mask. He wore a mask. It says when he spoke with God, he took off the mask. When he communicated God's word to the people, no mask. But when he went around his business, when he was, gardening, he wore a mask so that it wouldn't blind anybody. His face was radiant. And that's also something that's not in this course directly, but it's something that, is a very strange story about the mask that no one talks about. But nonetheless, the Torah says it's called masveh. He wore a mask, yeah.
If in the Torah there's no vowels,
yeah,
we only have the letters.
So how do we know what it means?
How do we know which pronunciation?
Very good question. Very good question. So David's asking a gewaltige question. A gewaltige question. The question is, if there are no vowels, I'll say like a Talmudic inflection. If there are no vowels, so how do we know that it means radiant and not horn? Maybe he did have horns. How do we know? Maybe Jerome's got it right. Well, the answer is that the context, I guess. Although I don't know, the Vulgate thought the context made sense. His face was horned.
I mean, it says he was wearing a mask after.
Right, it says he wore a mask. Well, I don't know, a bumpy complexion. I'm kidding. Yeah, to cover the horns, right? It's funny though because the mask had whatever. The point is that we have an oral tradition. The oral tradition tells us how to read the words. Like there are so many words that could be read. Okay, the truth is, later on in the lesson we're gonna talk about this, but let's just introduce it now. You've seen inside a Torah scroll, there's no punctuation, there's no commas, there's no semicolons, there's no em dashes, there's no colons, there's no periods, nothing. You have like a wall. Sometimes you have like an entire column of the Torah scroll, column of unbroken text, just one run-on sentence essentially. So how do we know where one sentence begins and where it ends? How do we know when it says the letters mem, shin, hey, that it's Moshe and not Miseh, which means from a sheep, right? How do we know? We know because we know. We know because we have a tradition about how to read it. And one of the traditions is that this means a karan, that his face was radiant and not horned. They didn't have the tradition, so he just translated it however he felt. He said, karan, Karen, horn, and so he translated that. He missed it. He didn't have that foundation of the oral tradition. So we have a tradition. Without the tradition, as we'll talk about soon in this class, you can't read any of Torah. The whole thing is a run-on sentence. So we always lean on the tradition about how to read it and what the words, how to pronounce the words. The point is that this is where the misconception of Jews having horns comes from. And I think what's very telling about this is that the Torah only tells us about Moses' radiant face by the second tablets, not by the first set of tablets. And what's the difference? By the second set of tablets, the Jews had committed a sin, the sin of the golden calf, and had repaired the sin through tshuva, through repentance, coming back to God, etc. And in our tradition, when you kind of think about someone who's never, experienced any sin versus someone who has, walked on the dark side but come back, that person, the latter, is always on a higher rung than someone who's never tasted. And I think that's the symbolism of Moses' face shining. It shines only by the second set of tablets to indicate that while others might think that perfection is better, and if you sin, you're going to have a blemished face, horns, Judaism says it's not a blemish. If you sin and come back, you're actually radiant. There's some symbolism in the actual mistake, right? Most people think, you're going to have a bumpy complexion. You come back, you'll always have some scars. You always have some, these doctrines of, sin, of dominating. Judaism, the highest level is someone who has come back from wherever they were, distance from God, coming back is the highest and most radiant space to be in. And that's indeed what it states in text 9, which I just shared outside, but we're not going to read inside. All right, let's continue with more topics. We got a lot more topics. Another misconception or myth on how to read the Bible, how to read the Torah. Before we get there, we're going to talk about an eye for an eye soon and how that's not literal. But before we get there, there's a little box in the middle of page 16. I'll read the box. Family matters. Sometimes you have to scratch your head and wonder, how did a certain myth gain such widespread circulation when the Bible clearly states otherwise? One such example is the common belief that Esther, Queen Esther, was Mordechai's niece, when actually they were first cousins. Here's what the second chapter of the book of Esther says. And Mordechai raised Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she was orphaned from her father and mother. In other words, he was not her uncle, but she was his uncle's daughter, which means that they were first cousins. All right. So again, the more you know. All right. Now let's talk about the phrase from my Bar Mitzvah Torah portion, Mishpatim, in the book of Exodus, where it talks about an eye for an eye. Helene, please read. Mom? Yeah? No? Who's no? Okay. Got it. All right. So Helene, please read text 10a. Take it away, please.
An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a hand for a hand, a foot for a foot.
Now, what's important to know over here is the following. What's important to know is that this is, the context of this is where the Torah describes what is the penalty for injuring another person. And it says, if someone assaults another person, an eye for an eye, a tooth for... Now, what would that imply? Well, if someone injures someone's eye, what do you do to them? Injure their eye. If someone injures someone else's tooth, what do you do to them, to the assailant? You injure their tooth, etc. But Jewish tradition, again, the oral tradition, the Jewish tradition is that that's not what the text means. It always means a monetary payment. An eye for an eye means you pay the value, however you assess the value of the injury. In other words, there's a monetary number put on the injury that's caused, and that is what the perpetrator has to pay financially, not actually injuring them because they injured someone else. Now, the proof for this is actually a few verses earlier. The very same chapter of Exodus 21, a few verses, 2 or 3 verses earlier, it says the following when it comes to injuring someone else. Helene, please read this one as well, text 10b.
If men quarrel, and one strikes the other with a stone or with a fist, and the victim does not die but is confined to bed, if the victim then gets up and walks about outside unaided, the assailant shall be cleared. He shall only pay for income loss to the victim's enforced idleness and his medical costs.
So here we have, thank you for reading that. Here we have a clear biblical description that if someone injures, or someone strikes and injures someone else, and they don't die, thank God, right? They get up and they're ultimately healed. Then the assailant, the perpetrator of this violence, is cleared of a capital case. It's not a capital case, and the penalty is only financial. You should only pay idleness, medical costs, etc., for the injury. And so clearly the Torah is only talking about a financial penalty, and not, you don't injure the person that injured someone else.
There's no compensation for pain and suffering.
There is. There's other verses, although it's not here, there are other verses that talk about pain and suffering. In fact, the Talmud describes 5 payments: nezek, tsar, ripui, shevet, and boshet. Those are 5 categories. Nezek is somehow there was an algorithm, with some sort of number that was assigned to the actual damage that was done. Tsar means the pain. Ripui means refuah, like the medical bills. Shevet, like Shabbos, is lost wages due to not being able to work. And finally, boshet is the emotional distress of the injury. So there's the injury, the pain. Suffering is a separate category. Pain, hospital bills, lost wages, and the kind of emotional, pain, the suffering of the injury. So there's actually 5 things, but it's always financial. You don't actually beat up someone who beat up someone else. That's not the Jewish system. Another proof for this, Helene, one more please, text 10c, is from the book of Leviticus, where it uses a similar expression with regards to somebody injuring an animal, or actually killing an animal.
One who slays an animal that belongs to another shall pay for it, a life for a life.
So if you look at that verse, when it says a life for a life, and it says pay for it, obviously a life for a life doesn't mean that if something, now, we're not allowed to cause injuries to animals or take the life of an animal, but if someone does, it's not there's no capital punishment for taking the life of an animal. So clearly it's about a monetary payment. Nefesh, tachat, nafesh, same expression that's used. Tachat, instead of a soul for a soul, a life for a life, but it doesn't mean that you kill the perpetrator. It means the financial penalty. You have to pay for the value of the animal that was killed. All right. All of this points to the need for an oral tradition, because if you just read Torah, right? If you just read the Torah and the verses the way it's written, you might think an eye for an eye means quite literally an eye for an eye. That's why you cannot study Torah without the guide of the oral tradition. I alluded to this before, but let's look at this right now. We'll do a learning activity together. I'm going to read this, page 18. This is an excerpt from the book of Numbers, chapter 5, verses 5 through 10. So it's 6 verses. And it's translated here literally and in a run-on sentence the way the Hebrew would appear. Again, just to be very clear here, if you were to open up a Torah scroll and you were to look at a Torah scroll, it has a bunch of columns, another column. Most of the Torah is unbroken text, just words, no punctuation, no vowelization. Periodically you have paragraph breaks, but until the paragraph break, it's kind of like one run-on paragraph. And so here's a feeling of what that would look like if we were to literally translate the words in English and not put in any punctuation. Page 18. And God spoke to Moses to say, speak to the children of Israel, a man or woman, if they shall do of all the sins of man to act treacherously against God, and that soul is guilty, they shall confess the sin they committed and return his guilt in his head, and his fifth he should add on it and give it to the one to whom he was guilty. And if the man has no redeemer to whom to return the guilt that is returned to God, to the priest, besides the ram of atonements, which he atones with him on him, and every uplifting for all the holies of the children of Israel, which they bring near to the priest, shall be his. A person as holy to him shall be, which he gives to the priest shall be his. Gesundheit. And I know what you might have been thinking as I started that. You're like, oh, I got this. But then as it went on, it's like, ooh, I don't got this. What are we even talking about? You can't study Torah without an oral tradition. Here's another example. And here there is punctuation. But in order for this exercise to work on page 19, you got to be honest, right? You have to, and here's what I mean by that. For this exercise, forget everything you know about about how this is interpreted. This is the Shema, about how we understand the Shema. And pretend like you were encountering this text for the first time without any oral tradition. Discard all of that. And let me read these verses. All right? You ready? Page 19. And these words that I command you today, And these words that I command you this day shall be upon your heart. You shall teach them to your sons, and speak of them when you sit in your house, when you walk on the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up, and you shall bind them for a sign upon your hand, and they shall be for a totaphot between your eyes, and you shall inscribe them upon the doorposts of your house and upon your gates. And I ask you the following question. The following questions. You know what? We have A, B, C, D, and E on the page. What are these words that I command you today? What are these words? B, how do we place them on our heart? C, how and where do we bind them to our hand? D, how and where do we make them into totaphot between our eyes? E, how do we inscribe them on our doorposts and on our gates? And I know what you're thinking. Well, I know what it means. It means Torah, education, right? Tefillin, mezuzah. But that's because we have the oral tradition. If you were just read a book that I read a few years ago by a fellow named A.J. Jacobs. He's a writer for the New York Times Magazine. He's a humorist. And he does what I would call kind of stunts for about a year and then writes a book about it. So like one year he read the entire encyclopedia and he writes about that activity. Another year, he lived a year according to the Bible. His book is called My Year of Living Biblically. That's the title of the book. He basically lived by the Bible. And it's funny because when he gets to the commandment to wear tzitzit, strings on the corner of a garment, so he's a Jewish guy and he knows what this is. He knows what a talit is. But he's like, I don't know, it says you put fringes, you put strings on a four-corner garment, so he pinned them to a garment. How do we know that it goes on the corners? Right? How do we know what it looks like? How do we know that when it says, and you shall inscribe them upon the doorposts of your house and upon your gates, how do we know that it looks like this? How do we know? Tradition, we have this, the oral tradition. Torah Shabbat Peh. If you don't have an oral tradition, then none of this makes sense, and none of this is at all intelligible or actionable. I'll give you another example. The Talmud tells a story of a fellow who comes to, who was it? Was it Hillel or Rabbi Akiva? I don't know. He said, basically, teach me Torah, but on condition that you only teach me the written Torah and not the oral Torah. I don't want to know don't give me any rabbinic interpretation. I just want to know the written Torah. He says, okay, but the first thing before I teach you Torah, I have to teach you how to read Hebrew. So he teaches them. He teaches them the first day, Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet. Good. First day in the books. The guy comes back the next day, and the rabbi says, let's go over the letters. And he calls the letters with a different name. Gimel, Tav, Shin, Resh, he just mixes up the letters. He says, yesterday you told me that this was Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, hey. Now you're telling me something different. Or no, he said, let's show you, this can't be right. Yesterday you told me. He says, if you need to rely on me for how to actually pronounce even the very basic letters, so how do you not need to rely on a tradition as to what they mean? As to the meaning of the phrases. In other words, every book or every system, certainly Torah, needs an outside key to make it readable. Starting with the very language. You can't know from the letters themselves how to read them. Are you with me on that? The letters themselves don't tell you how to read it. You have to have an outside source of information that tells you how to read the letters. If you have an outside source telling you what an aleph is and what a bet is and what they mean and etc., so why are you opposed to having outside information telling you what it means when you're instructed to inscribe them upon the doorposts of your house and upon your gates? That also doesn't tell you what it means. You also need outside information for that. You see the point? You always need a tradition. Yeah, Jay.
In the Torah, when they're going around, it says you're going to live in a sukkah for a week.
Yeah.
If you don't have the Talmud, you have no idea. How do you make this sukkah? What is it?
What is a sukkah? What's a hut? Right? How can we have the age-old tradition of a sukkah party called Pizza in the Hut if we don't know what a hut is? Right? What's going to happen to all the flyers that have been made? Pizza in the Hut flyers. Okay, good. Now, let's take a look. Oh, look at this. Another proof that there is an oral tradition is text 11a All right, let's do this. Dasi, please read text 11a. This is from the book of Deuteronomy. This is phenomenal.
You shall slaughter as I have commanded you, of your cattle and of your sheep that God has given you, and you may eat meat in your cities as per your heart's desire.
Okay, so in Deuteronomy, a lot of Torah talks about, a lot of verses on, the sacrifices and the offerings of animals. Okay, but here is a specific instruction or a specific discussion about regular meat consumption. This is not for the temple, it's not for the altar, it's not for God. This is just if you want to eat meat, then before you eat meat, you have to slaughter it. You have to shecht, we call it shecht, you have to shecht an animal, and as the Torah says, you have to slaughter it as I commanded you. Here's the problem. When you look at the entire 5 books of Moses, there's no instruction about how to slaughter. So what does it mean? It's slaughter as I've commanded you. That is an indication in the written Torah itself that there were verbal communications outside of the written text. When the Torah says, slaughter it as I've commanded you, that must mean that there were commands that were just committed to memory, that were not necessarily written down. Maimonides himself mentions this. Stasi, one more please, text 11b. He says that this is a proof for the oral tradition.
The slaughter that the Torah mentions without any elaboration needs to be explained in order for us to know the following. Which place on the animal is appropriate for ritual slaughter? How large must the incision be? With what do we slaughter? When do we slaughter? Where do we slaughter? How do we slaughter? What factors disqualify the slaughter? Who can slaughter? Regarding all these factors, the Torah instructs us, you shall slaughter as I commanded you of your cattle. All of these laws are commanded to us orally, as is true with regard to the remainder of the oral law.
All right, thank you. So that's again a kind of a proof for the existence of the oral tradition. Now, we're going to do a few more things, then we're going to close out today's class. So, the first of the remaining points that I want to make is, take a look at page 22. You see their chapter and verse. So that is kind of an excerpt from the Torah scroll. And you see there, first of all, there's no punctuation, there are no periods, but there are paragraph breaks. And there's 2 types of paragraph breaks. There's the type of paragraph break that goes to the end of the line, and then there's one that is only a certain amount of space, but the text picks up in the middle of the line. You see that? One is called a petucha, and one is called a setuma. Anyway, those are 2 different types of breaks. We're not going to get into it now, but there are breaks. Now, another thing to know is that the whole chapter and verse, like Leviticus 5 or Genesis 12 or Exodus 35. Yeah, chapters and verse are not of Jewish origin. It comes from Christian origins. It's actually disputed as to when exactly, who was the one that kind of first invented the chapter and verse, but it's not a Jewish invention. And for a while, rabbis were kind of rejecting it as not being Jewish, but eventually Jews had to adopt it when they were forced into debates in the Middle Ages, with I don't know, either the king or members of other religions, etc. And they had to kind of bounce back verses and scriptural verses from one to the other. So they had to become familiar with the chapter and verse system that was prevalent elsewhere. And so that became adopted by rabbis and ultimately became adopted within Jewish circles. And, if you open up a Chumash, which is, a printed form of the Torah, you'll see it's marked there with chapters and verses, and it's similar to what exists. It's identical to what exists out there in the world. Now, we're going to conclude with one final thing. One final interesting note, and it is the final 3 verses of the Torah. Meira, please read text 14a, the final 3 verses of the entire 5 books of Moses. And it's the eulogy, Torah's eulogy of the great leader Moses.
There has never arisen another prophet in Israel like Moses, who communicated with God face to face, who executed all the signs and wonders that God sent him to perform in the land of Egypt on Pharaoh and all his servants and to all his land, and for all the strong hand and great awesomeness performed by Moses before the eyes of all Israel.
Basically, the Torah is telling us there's no one ever like Moses who did all of these wonders, performed all these miracles before the eyes of all Israel. Now you're wondering, what did he do already? I mean, I guess he helped facilitate the plagues and splitting the sea and, all that stuff. But what did he do before the eyes of all Israel? Rashi, the preeminent commentator to the Torah, says the following, text 14b. One more, please.
This expression alludes to the incident in before Israel's eyes, as it is stated, and I shattered them before your eyes.
All right, I referenced it before. We talked about Moses coming down with the second set of tablets and his face was shining. But what happens with the first set of tablets? He comes down the mountain. The people are worshiping the golden calf. We've all seen the movie. Moses said, those who cannot live by the law shall die by the law, or something like that. He smashed the tablets, and the next thing you know, they are in fragments on the ground. Rashi says, that's the final eulogy. That's the final verse of the Torah. Right? You know who Moses was? He did all these great wonders and great awesomeness performed by Moses before the eyes of all Israel. You know what he did? Concludes the Torah. He smashed the tablets, and you're thinking, that's how Torah ends? By recalling such a bitter time, such a horrible time for our people, the time of sin, when Moses breaks God's own handiwork, God's writing, God's inscription on the tablets. Moses breaks it, and that's how the Torah ends? And we say, hooray for Moses, he shattered the tablets. What? What a sad reference at the end. But here's how we're going to conclude the class today, lesson number 1. Conclude on a positive note. Why did Moses break the tablets? Most of us believe it's because he was angry. He saw what they were doing. He got upset. How dare you? He was mad, and he threw the tablets down and he shattered them. But in truth, the commentaries say, it's a medrash, text 15, I'll paraphrase, we're not going to read inside, that there's a much deeper reason. You see, the tablets contained the law that they had broken. Because the tablet said, I am the Lord your God, and don't have any other gods, don't worship idols. And they were dancing around the golden calf, proclaiming it, this is the God of Israel, who took us out of the land of Egypt. They were committing idolatry at that moment. Moses, the ever committed and ever dedicated leader, instead of holding the law and saying, you guys just broke this, instead, he ripped up the contract that we were violating. And he did so because of his love for the people. At the end of the Torah concludes, you know what was the greatness of Moses? It's not that he was God's, he was a goody two-shoes, or he was God's right-hand man, or that he was so dedicated and so pious. You know what his greatness as a leader was? That he was willing to sacrifice everything, including God's own tablets, to protect the people that he loved. And you know what? Ultimately, God loved him for that. God loves when we stand up and defend our fellow human being. Even when maybe they haven't done everything right. Moses puts his own name on the line. Moses puts his own relationship with God on the line by breaking God's divinely inscripted tablets in order to preserve the Jewish people. This becomes a shining moment. And it reminds us that we should always put our love of each other first, and recognize the value of each other, and not be so quick to throw another person under the proverbial bus. My friends, thank you very much for joining me for lesson 1 of Fascinating Facts. You guys were great. Give yourselves a round of applause. Thank you. Hope you enjoyed it. Next week, our topic is, one second, let me look at my notes. Our topic is sunrise, sunset. Exploring the myths and misconceptions of the Jewish life cycle. So that is next week. Today was biblical literacy. Next week is Jewish life cycles for 100 Alex. Thank you very much for joining me tonight. See you next week. Same bad time, same bad channel. You can always mix and match. Daytime, evening time. And if you pop into town, like Danielle did, you can always show up. And we'll even have these cool looking dessert pastries for you. All right. Amazing. Good to see you all. All right, questions, comments?
Could I suggest that Manischewitz's name was Streitz?
That's hilarious. It wasn't, but that is very funny. That would be the ultimate plot twist. I've always said along those lines, imagine, if I was like, imagine if Coke and Pepsi were really owned by the same company. And they pitted themselves against each other just to make them, the rivalry that everyone pays attention to, and then there's no number 3. That would be brilliant. Who knows? Maybe Mr. Manischewitz was originally Mr. Streitz. That would be epic. Mom, I think you're onto something. I love it. All right.
Great plan.
Thank you. We're only heating up from here. All right, good. Questions, comments?
Well, Coke and Pepsi. Maybe one of them was really Dr. Pepper.
By the way, my understanding, this is what my kids tell me, is that Dr. Pepper is unanimously in their circles the top. They're huge Dr. Pepper fans. I don't know. That's what I'm hearing.
I've seen that statue of Moses.
Rome. Which one?
Yes.
The horns?
Yes.
And he has a tail also. It's one of the most preeminent sculptures in the world. It's probably one of the top sculptures in the entire world. All by Michelangelo.
And how would someone not think the Jews have horns?
Tablets. You can't tell if he's trying to sit down on the throne or he's trying to get up from a throne. But he's got the tablets.
He's got the horns.
Yeah, and you can see
you guys saw it also?
His arms and the muscles.
Yes.
It looks like live skin. It looks like a living human being. It's unbelievable.
He did such a good job. They're still wondering where our horns are in 2025 after all these years.
And he has a tail, but it's an incredible sculpture.
I was asked where my tail is in gym class.
I will say this. Didn't Michelangelo once say when it came? Did he make David also? Did he?
David.
Okay, so I think he said about David that he didn't make David. That David was there. He just cleared away that which wasn't David. He clearly was a talented man. But he also clearly depicted Moses as having horns. Now, there's a counter argument to that, by the way. The counter, which I didn't present, is that maybe he didn't intend for it to be horns. Maybe he just intended it to kind of the radiance. You know, maybe it was like
a Statue of Liberty.
Rays of light, not horns.
Like the Statue of Liberty.
Statue of Liberty, right, has the different rays. I don't know. Also, is she not getting tired of carrying? It's been a while. Shame. Someone should help her.
Their arm.
Anyway, all right, good to see you guys.
Can I ask you a question or mention something?
Thank you, Phil. Hold on one second, Jay. Hold on 1 second. Yeah.
So, what is the registration fee? We wanted to give you a check.
Sure, it's $120 each.
$120 each.
Yeah. 240. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, awesome.
And that's the meals, right?
Correct. You guys want to do the?
No.
Yeah.
Make it out to
Torah Center, the Torah Center ATL, or Torah Center of Atlanta. Yeah, sure. Jay, jump in.
About the first
Pleasure,
set of
thank you.
glucose.
Yes.
That they were so heavy that it was God's, that they were sacred, that God's spirit was carrying
Yes.
the glucose.
Yes.
And when an egel happened, the spirit of Hashem left, and he couldn't carry it in.
Correct. Good to see. Yes, that is a tradition that the energy, the miraculous, lightweightness flew out, and then it collapsed to the ground. Correct. Yep. Anyway, a lot of different mafarshim on it, lots of commentaries. All right. Thank you. Good night, everybody. We'll see you guys. Be well. Lots of blessings. We'll see you next week.